I call this Altoona City Council meeting to order Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. We'll now have a moment of silent prayer. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Linda, would you take the roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Butterbaugh.
Here.
Councilman Kashadi. Councilman Carper.
Here.
Councilman Ickes.
Here.
Councilwoman Jordan is absent. Councilman Kelly.
Here.
And Mayor Pacifico.
Here. Our first presentation tonight is our 2019 financial audit by Dan Bradley from Young Oaks and Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor and Council for their continued confidence in our firm. We greatly appreciate the relationship we have with the city. I'd also be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Decker, Mr. Strom, Ms. Mosey, and the remaining staff of the city for all the assistance they gave us during the course of the audit. It was very much appreciated, so thank you very much. For the year ended December 31, 2019, the city earned what we call an unmodified or a clean opinion on the financial statements, meaning there's no material misstatements contained in your financial statements. That's what everyone wants to receive is the, again, the unmodified or the clean opinion. We have various financial statements. I'm not sure if you folks have the statements in front of you or not, but I'll reference certain pages. Page 18, we have our statement of net position. There's a few numbers that we want to highlight on the statement of net position. First of all, what is the city's net position as of December 31, 2019? It's about $309 million. Now, of that, about $345 million is invested in capital assets, net of related debt. So that's where most of the city's net position is. In fact, once we take out some restricted net assets, we actually end up with a deficit for the unrestricted or unreserved monies. And that deficit's about $50,597,000. A lot of that relates to the fact that we have a large net pension liability here at the city and also a large other post-employment benefit liability here at the city of Altoona. And that's really what really gave rise to the deficit in unrestricted net position. On page 19 is our statement of activities. Again, we're going to focus on just the governmental activities, which are the city of Altoona's activities. And during the current year, the city actually suffered a loss of about $34 million in their governmental activities. Now, $17 million of that related to monies that were given to the water authority. This is the first time where this has happened because essentially what the city did is they assumed some debt of the water authority, and that netted out to about $17 million. So that contributed to that $34 million deficit or reduction in our net position here at the city of Altoona. The more important part of the statements actually begin then on page 20, which is the balance sheet, and this is the fund balance sheet, if you will. So this really looks at your most current assets and current liabilities. And based upon those items, if we could focus just on the general fund, the city does actually have a fund balance of about $6,645,000. There are a few restrictions against those monies, but the unrestricted amounts or unassigned amounts are about $4.5 million. So that's what the city has going forward for spending in 2020 and beyond. Going on to page 22, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. Again, if we could focus on just the general fund, you'll notice that the fifth number from the bottom actually shows a reduction in fund balance of about $2.8 million in the current year. And then about $2.8 million reduction in our fund balance in the current year. When we look at our fiduciary net position and our fiduciary funds, primarily the city's three pension funds, they actually had a good year. in 2019. They've actually increased by about $7.3 million. A lot of that was related to the stock market and the good performance that we had in the stock market and the pension plans investments during 2019. Then we have the largest part of our audit report actually is made up of the notes, pages 26 through 98. Again, there's a lot of information in those notes about the city's cash position, their property taxes, capital assets, notes payable, bonds payable. But a large part of that is also made up of details relative to your net pension liability and your other post-employment benefit liabilities. In fact, about 25 pages are made up of just those two items. And then in hand with that, on pages 99 through 118, we have what we call required supplementary information. This is something the standard setters, the GASBs, have told us that we have to include in your audit report. Again, those 19 pages, what do they relate to? Entirely net pension liabilities and other post-employment benefit liabilities. So obviously a great deal of focus is given on those two items by standard setters as it relates to governmental accounting because of the significance of those two numbers. The CFA, or the Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, is shown on pages 126 and 127. That shows that during the current year, the city spent about during the year 2019, the city spent about $2.7 million of federal funds. We looked at two programs, the CDBG program and also the home program, and we looked at all the compliance related to that. As a result of doing our audit of the financial statements as well as doing our audit of those two major federal programs, we had to issue internal control and compliance reports. And the city had, as a result of that, 4 findings. In discussion with Mr. Decker, I know that the city is very determined to eliminate all 4 of those findings. And again, I'm very supportive of that going forward. And I think that Mr. Decker does have a plan on trying to eliminate most of those findings in the near future, which again is commendable. And again, I think it's going to be very, very good for the city. But if anybody has any questions at all about the audit report, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them at this time.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Matt.
It's a lot better now than it was a few years back, that's for sure.
There's no doubt about that, Mr. Buterball. Yeah, I mean, it was not uncommon. I'm not sure how many years ago that we would walk in and talk about our 35 findings. So the city has come a long, long way in that period of time.
Ken, I
Hey,
don't know,
thanks.
I'm sorry, David. Didn't you
You're
know?
good, you're good.
Ken, I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to comment on the report of the auditor?
Well, certainly, it's, appreciate the relationship that we have with the auditor. I think the quality of the work is excellent. I'm happy with the degree. And I think ideally what it is a partnership, because the audit firm is not only making sure that our numbers are correct and that we're accountable, but also working for us to help how we do accounting, how we manage our finances. So I think it's a positive relationship. I think it's easy to get kind of lost in the wall of numbers in the audit. So part of what I guess my goal in the budget presentation is to try to put some narrative around that, because there were some really big numbers mentioned. We're going to have to dial it back to sort of how we're going to pay the bills next year a little bit. But my thanks to Dan for his work, for his teams, the engagement team's work, and certainly a tip of the hat. And we are committed to having 0 findings on next year's audit.
Yeah, Dan, I just want to echo that to you and your firm for the commendable work you guys have done over the years with the city of Altoona. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving along to our next presentation, the 2021 proposed budget review. City Manager Ken Decker.
Well, Mayor, members of council, thanks for the opportunity to present the budget for 2021. Under the city's charter, by the way, run out while you can, Dan. Under the charter, the Office of the City Manager is responsible for preparing the budget. And I think because we get involved in city government in the details, it's easy for us to sort of take things as read. So I think it's important to just provide sort of a broad context. Like any organization, we try to plan. The budget is our principal planning document for the coming year. We actually have multiple budgets. This is the operating budget. The council adopted a capital budget, which governs our large expenditures last year for a 2-year period. And we also have subset budgets of that. The budget basically lists our revenues on one side, our expenditures on the other, and it's our best estimate of what we're going to be doing. We're about halfway through the budget process now. You know, we start out as a staff doing revenue projections and looking at trends in expenses, looking at the economic situation. And it's an iterative process. We've met multiple times. I've met with members of council individually, and we're really kind of at the halfway point now. So as opposed to this being the ending budget, this is really the middle of the process, and we have some work sessions planned to kind of try to further refine the numbers. But the direction given to me by council was to come up with a budget that balanced without any revenue increases or tax increases. So maybe even pulling back a little bit farther in the way of a deeper perspective. I don't think it's a newsflash to anyone that the city of Altoona has shrunk over the past 100 years. What's amazing to me is how much it has, because we're about half the size we were in 1920. I mean, that's a remarkable contraction of population for a municipal government. What's really surprising, and I think what you hear a lot of times, particularly in conservative communities, is that the population may shrink, but government never does. And that's not true here. We've actually lost 48 positions since 2003 when the Positively Altoona plan was written. So what you can see is we were at 264 full-time positions. We're now down under 220. And so when there's sometimes a narrative, well, government always expands, it always encroaches. I don't think that's been the case here. And in our particular instance, this hasn't made the news because I think it's just been a slow attrition over the course of time. As the new manager, I also wanted to take a look back because there have been so momentous things that happened over the last decade. And looking back from 2011 to now, I think the things that come to people's mind are Home Rule and Act 47. But what makes a difference in the budget is less those two events and more some bigger things. I know that the first reassessment in 58 years was a fairly significant event for the city and the county, and it generates about 1.43 million more in revenue over that 10-year period. One of the things that came out of Act 47 was an increase in the income tax, which generates an additional 2.1, and the Water Authority's contribution has increased by over 3 million. But if you take those three things away, we actually have less in revenues today than we did in 2011. But as the next slide will show, the size of government, or the size of government may have shrunk, but the cost keeps going up. So even with Act 47 and depending on what employee you were, 3 or 4 years of wage freezes, our expenses increased on average by about 2.27% a year. All the while our tax base is shrinking. And that's the existential challenge we face in putting together the budget. So budgets aren't just numbers, they're really ideas in the beginning. And the first and most important idea came from you, which is make this budget work without increasing the tax burden on our residents. And we know this has been an unprecedented year for our nation, for the world, for our community. It's been incredibly impactful. Businesses have suffered, residents have suffered. I think the message that I got from the council is we're going to share that pain. We're going to be in solidarity with our community, and we're not going to dump our woes on their doorsteps or on their pocketbook. We also know that it's a strange year in that things have happened that have never happened before, including the federal government printing $3 trillion. It's just never occurred. So understanding what that means to the economy is really difficult to decipher. So we also approached the budget with a couple other big core ideas. One is we needed to find a way to shrink our footprint, but we also wanted to improve the services we provide to our community. And we didn't want to pick and choose. We wanted to make make whatever cuts we were gonna make across the board. So getting into the nuts and bolts, on the revenue side, revenues are down next year. That's what we're projecting anyway, and they're down by almost $600,000. Our three main sources of revenue are property taxes, income taxes, and fees, namely the lease payment the water authority gives us. That's the bulk of our revenues. We haven't seen a major impact due to COVID yet, but we're really uncertain as to what the next year is going to hold. So I think we were cautious about our revenue projections, but we think that's a sustainable number. We're hoping the economy bounces back, but there's a lot of real estate between now and then, and we're also facing a fairly significant event in early November, which could have an effect on the economy as well. This is what I call my homage or Omar-age, because this is the wall of numbers that you normally see in a budget presentation. I wanted to include this because I'm going to ask Linda to put the PowerPoint on the website. So if you want to see what the actual numbers are on the revenue side, here they are. I'm not going to walk through them individually, certainly can answer questions about them, but the bottom line is we're at about 32.8, which is down from last year's revenues fairly significantly. So what does the budget do? And first, and something I'm going to keep, I guess, focusing on is there's not a tax increase here. I mean, our tax base is shrinking, but there's no rate increases. And we're honoring the 2% pay increase that we're giving employees that was collectively bargained as part of the last agreement, and also respecting that pay increase for the non-represented employees. So what's probably going to make the news tomorrow is the downsizing of positions. And there was really no way to make this budget balance without shrinking our staff footprint. On the public safety side, those are positions that aren't going to be direct layoffs, but we're just not going to backfill positions as retirement occurs. 4 police officers, 2 firefighters. On the non-public safety side, we've got 3 positions in community development, 2 in public works, and 4 admin support staff sort of spread across the organization. The budget adds a couple positions, possibly a third, depending on the outcome of our continued budget conversations. Omar has been our combination HR and finance director for 17 years, an organization with a $33 million a year budget, and our degree of financial complexity needs a full-time finance director. We also are making some major changes with community development. I think it's important to consolidate that, because one of the things I've heard loud and clear from the council is, to the extent we can redevelop within Altoona, we want to make that happen. We want to work cooperatively with developers. We want to have a one-stop approach. When someone wants to come in and do something with their property, we want to work with them to make that happen. So the phrase I use with the staff is, we want to be a guide through the forest, not a guardian of a wall. So our job is to try to recreate and reinvent ourselves to make people who want to do things in Altoona, convert old properties, renovate the city. We want to make that an easier process for them. Part of that strategic approach is taking what's now community development and phasing it into what's codes and inspections and the finance office. And we have sort of a long range plan to make that happen. And there'll be some other structural things we'll try to get done in the coming year, depending on the availability of resources. So what the city's budget doesn't do, and Dan alluded to this, is while Dan threw out some big numbers, there's some big numbers I'll throw out, which is how much money that we owe at some point, which is money that we owe in pensions, over $42 million of money that it needs to be gathered to be able to honor our pension commitments to our retirees. $30 million of unfunded liability put for police and fire healthcare. Our total debt service adds up to $112 million. And honestly, we're still doing the math to figure out how big our deferred maintenance. So those are some big, frightening numbers, but part of chewing our way through that mountain of liability is taking it one step at a time. I don't think that that's something this year's budget does, but clearly that's a goal I have for the future. One of the things that's unusual about Altoona is that we've, as a city, taken a lot of our functions and put them in authorities that are separate from us. We have a water authority which handles water and sewer. We have Blair Rec, which handles Parks and Recreation. We have AMED, which handles EMS. We have a parking authority. For a city that does everything under one roof, a budget challenge like this is a little bit easier because there are other places they can go. We mostly do public safety. And if you take a look at the graphic, by far, the three top things that we spend money on are police, fire, and pensions. And most of the pension money is on police and fire. I mean, that's just the math of what we do as a city. So when it comes time to trying to balance the budget, there's just not enough everything else to balance a budget. There's got to be some kind of impact on public safety. And as you can see, the contributions we make to allied agencies compared to many municipalities is fairly small. We're not subsidizing a lot of things, but we have basically a core services model, and the two most important services, or the two most expensive, are police and fire.
Ken, I'm sorry,
Sure.
and I hope you don't mind me, but
No, please.
is it fair to say that that MMO, that our pension obligation and the unfunded, I mean, that really could also fall into the area of debt service too?
Sure.
Because that's an obligation that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no way we can
Okay.
not pay it. So and that's something. This is a point that I doubt the council will make, but one I'll make, I think, on behalf of the council and the city. It may seem like the council controls his budget, but this budget's largely made by decisions that were made before we ever came to this room and by people who've never been in this room. So federal and state decisions have had a profound effect on this budget, and the decision of previous mayors and councils, the die has been cast in many ways. So a great deal of what we spend our money on as a city is in response to decisions that were made by previous generations of elected officials. And that's not to be critical of those people, but the simple reality is the pension decisions that were made, the collective bargaining decisions that were made, the debt decisions that were made, all of those things create a budget that doesn't have a great deal of wiggle room in it. There's just not a lot of room for decision making because in many ways we're living with those previously made decisions. So here's our second wall of numbers, which is all the expenses, which I'll include for the sake of full disclosure. And I think what you see is that pretty much everything gets cut, and where it's not being cut, it's actually just an administrative change within the budget to move items to places where I think they make more sense. But across the board, every department came up with reductions. So this budget's not being balanced on the back of any one area or any one department. It's really an across the board effort. And as required by law, the budget has to balance. We cannot spend more money than we take in revenues. So this year's budget is about getting through next year, but I also think when we sit down and do a budget, we should think about 10 years from now or 20 years from now. So the goals that you see in here are things like continuing to try to make sure that we're holding the line to the extent possible on taxes, borrowing less money, paying down our debt, doing things that are financially responsible things to do. One of the things I encountered when I came here is this narrative that the city had a surplus. Now, if I had 3 credit cards that were all maxed out, and I came into an extra $1,000 and ran in and told my wife, hey, look, I've got a surplus, I'm guessing that she would pick up the 3 credit card statements and say, not so much. You don't have a surplus until you've paid your bills. So the money that we acquired through the Act 47 process, while I think was incredibly important for the city, and there's still some of that money that exists to address exigent circumstances. Until we get ahead on these sort of core structural issues, we don't have a surplus. So this is just a little thing. There's never a good year to make a hard decision. It always seems like, well, maybe next year or the year after. the problem with budget math is the longer we wait to address these core issues, the more expensive they become. So I think in this budget, there are some very hard decisions, because anytime you have to look at an individual and say your position's being eliminated next year, that's hard. And these are people who, I know I'm relatively new, but department heads were in those meetings. These are people who dedicated decades of their life to working for the city, and certainly it's a difficult position to find ourselves in, but it's just the unavoidable situation that we're currently in. What you don't see in the budget, and what I'll add is that to the extent that we have layoffs that will occur, because some people whose position will be eliminated are retirement eligible and who I believe will choose to retire, all of those people will be kept on until the 1st of February to make the full payment into their health savings account. And part of my recommendation is that the city provide them health insurance and pay their COBRA premium for the first 6 months that they're dislocated, to allow people, particularly those with existing health conditions, to find a chance to settle in, get on their feet. It's just never a good time to be without health insurance, and I think that's a reasonable and compassionate thing that the city can do in light of the situation we currently find ourselves. So, at the risk of disappointing Councilman Kelly, who I know sometimes that my message in my first year has been a bit on the doom and gloom side, I think there's a lot of good news here. I mean, I think we've come here, I think we have some great staff people. I think we have people who are working hard. We have a very lean organization. I think we provide a high level of customer service and responsiveness to the community. So I think that there's some real talent that we can build this organization's future around. I can't speak highly enough of the leadership the mayor and council have provided, because this was a crossroads where it was a choice between sort of taking the easy route and trying to smoke and mirrors the budget, and then facing the hard choices. And the message I've consistently heard from the council is, we need to do the right thing. We need to do it now. So I certainly have a profound respect for that kind of leadership, and it's the kind of leadership I think is invaluable, not just to the organization, but to the community as a whole. I think Altoona is a great place. I think we're a tough community. I think we've seen things way tougher than COVID, because the disappearance of the railroad and the loss of, at one time, 17,000 railroad jobs. I mean, if we can shake that off and keep running, I mean, I think it's a community that is going to find a way to make it through. And I think that with this budget, that we have a plan for the future, not just how to survive another year, but how can we restructure and continue providing a high level of service with a very limited tax base. So I would be remiss not to thank the department heads and the finance staff for helping put the budget together, for the mayor and council for the support and encouragement in making the tough calls. So certainly all of our allied agencies, I mean, everybody has approached with, what can we do to help, make it through. So there's, at least in approaching this budget, and this is my first budget, there's a real sense of community here that goes beyond the organization. So if there are any questions I can answer, be delighted to do so.
Ken, I know you and the department have spent quite a bit of time on this, so I just want to thank you and the department heads for going through this. A couple of notes that I had made and some information that we had received here. Since 2017, which was the first year following reassessment in the county, since 2017, the city of Altoona has lost about 3% in property value assessments since that time. So we have continued to follow the trend as far as a declining with the decline in property values. And that has been the trend for the city for probably quite some time. And the largest amount of debt that we do incur is obviously through the pension liability and the MMO that we do have. Obviously, having a pension fund that has ranked in the bottom 5% of all defined benefit plans in the United States has not helped that. And the fact that we are several percentage points away from the anticipated the discount rate, the rate of return, probably actually only increases the actual liability that's on our books. So hopefully, I know that we're in the third stages here of the pension RFP. We can not only get a plan that yields better return, but also reduces our long-term costs, both administratively and with investment returns going forward. So, the challenges that we face here in the city are tough, but the citizens of Altoona are tougher. And, with God's grace and pulling together, we'll make it through this.
Hey, thank you, and good work. And I know one of the things that was brought out on one of the local radio shows was the finding $1 million was 3% of the budget, and they made a point that, well, 3% shouldn't be that difficult to cut. But one of the points that was made earlier tonight, out of the part of the budget we control, we can actually do something about, is where that does make it tough, because a lot of our budget is already pre-done by the federal and state levels and just passed down upon us. But we did give you the tough task of come up with a budget without raising taxes, and you guys have done a really good job at that. I know I could not have in my conscience raise taxes after all the folks of this city has been through. So thanks a lot for your work.
You're welcome.
I share those comments. This has been an incredibly difficult year. Obviously, retail and including the restaurants have been the hardest hit with the governor's shutdowns. And to increase taxes this year, I think would just compound the problems of 2020.
Well, thank you, Ken. At this time, we will open the floor up for public comment. The number and the access code will be displayed on this television screen. Is it on there?
It was on earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Before we open the floor for public comment, we're adding a resolution to the agenda tonight. Linda, would you read the resolution, please?
It is approving the submission of a grant application to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation for a multimodal transportation fund grant in the amount of $1,696,750 for the Altoona Transportation Center Improvement Project, and further authorizing the city manager to execute all documents associated with the grant application, and for the city clerk to attest to same as needed. That's going to be item K on the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, now at this time, we will open the floor for public comment. Please call the number and the access code on the screen. And when it is your turn to speak, please provide your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing none, we will close the floor for public comment, and we will move on to the resolutions. Linda, would you read the resolutions, please?
I guess I should also mention for the record that Councilman Kashadi is on the call. He's on the phone for the meeting. Okay, item A is approving the minutes of the Altoona City Council meeting held Wednesday, September 9th, 2020. Item B is approving the selection of ICMA RC as the city's retirement savings 457 plan provider and authorizing the city manager and city solicitor work with Marquette Associates in conformance with the previously approved contract to execute such agreements as necessary to transition from the city's existing provider to ICMA RC, and for the city clerk to attest to same. Item C is rejecting the bids for the Veterans Memorial Field Maintenance Garage and returning the bid security. Item D is rejecting a repository bid submitted by Sidney Rooney and Devin McCall of Lewistown for property located at 1900 and 1902 10th Street, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item E is approving a repository bid in the amount of $500 submitted by Julia McCoy of Pine Avenue for property located at 1920 Pine Avenue, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item F is approving a repository bid in the amount of $590 submitted by Dior Lowry of Pottstown for property located at 1817 to 1819 8th Avenue, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item G is approving a repository bid in the amount of $250 submitted by Dior Lowry of Pottstown for property located at 1108 17th Avenue, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item H is approving a repository bid in the amount of $250 submitted by Dior Lowry of Pottstown for property located at 1110 17th Avenue, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item I is approving a repository bid in the amount of $250 submitted by Dior Lowry of Pottstown for property located at 1118 17th Avenue, and further authorizing the city manager to execute the taxing district form. Item J is amending the 2019 Community Development Block Grant and Home Programs to adjust estimated program income to reflect actual program income received between July 1, 2019 and June 30, 2020. Item K is approving the submission of a grant application to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation for a multimodal transportation fund grant in the amount of $1,696,750 for the Altoona Transportation Center Improvement Project, and further authorizing the city manager to execute all documents associated with the grant application, and for the city clerk to attest to same as needed. Are there any additions, deletions, or items that need to be pulled for a separate vote?
Linda, I'd like to pull 4 items for separate vote, please. F, G, H, and I.
Okay.
And the reason is when we sell, or when the county sells these properties, sometimes folks are from around here and sometimes they're not. And regardless of where they're from, that's fine. But when there is not a local designee, or when they leave no contact information of who we can get a hold of in case something would come up with that property, that tends to create a problem, and it tends to create undue work for our codes folks who already have plenty of work to do. And having served a decade on the Blighted Property Committee, you could sort of tell when problems are on the rise, and we want to prevent those, certainly. And the last thing we want for our residents, for our citizens here, is when somebody buys a property near them and something goes wrong with that property, and then there's nobody to get a hold of. And so in some cases, a lot of folks come to these sales and make bids, and they're just speculating on properties that can perhaps make a profit, and then just sit on them and do nothing. And then if something does go wrong, if there's blight or a situation that we need to do something about, then you can't get a hold of somebody. And so that's why I'm voting no on items F, G, H, and I. And so thank you.
David, do you suggest that we vote no on those items, or do you suggest we table them?
Well, that's a good idea. I
mean,
like
I'm
that.
just,
I think that would be more fair. Let's table those items, and then that gives the county or the folks involved the opportunity to see if they have a local contact or somebody.
To
That-
get that extra information that that you'd like to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, then if there's consensus, can we just pull them from the agenda and table it then?
I guess I have a question as far as what's the process like to determine what we put on the agenda to approve or reject?
That may be a Rebecca question. Or is this completely county information we're getting?
It's Omar.
Oh, Omar, all right.
Okay, so the 4 bids that you're looking at are the land-only parcels. I put them on there for approval because the individual that had bid on them actually was approved for bids that he submitted, I believe, in the last meeting or in some previous meeting. In relation to the blight, I understand what you're saying, Councilman Butterbaugh, but there's really no property there for, really the only issue I guess we could have are an overgrown, field or something like that.
Yeah, and we have that happen a lot, even if there's no building, even if it's just trees or just grass, and the grass grows and nobody cuts it, or the trees are falling over onto the neighbor's ground or something like that.
Yeah, so really, I mean, it's obviously entirely up to you, in my opinion. I just put it out there as, after looking at the property, looking at the documentation that's submitted, I don't see any reason why it has to be withheld. But that's just my take on it. It's entirely up to you.
I would still like to I think tabling these are a better idea than voting them down. I think Councilman Kelly came up with a great idea, and I'll do some homework myself on this and get a hold of the folks and make sure.
Well, I certainly then would support tabling it until a later meeting, if that's all right with everyone else.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, Linda, those would just be pulled from the agenda and we won't vote on them tonight then?
Okay, and then we
Hey,
will,
thanks, Omar.
I will take a consent vote on items A, B, C, D, E, J, and K. Vice Mayor Butterbaugh,
Yes.
Councilman Kashadi,
Yes.
Councilman Carper,
Yes.
Councilman Ickes,
Yes.
Councilwoman Jordan is absent, Councilman Kelly,
Yes.
and Mayor Pacifico.
Yes.
And the consent vote passes 6-0. We have an ordinance for introduction, which is an ordinance of the City of Altoona amending the code of the City of Altoona by adding a new chapter 557 to be entitled Purchasing of Real Estate, Materials, Supplies, and Services, to provide definitions, provide procedures and parameters for purchasing real estate, materials, supplies, and services, provide for establishment of a director of purchasing and corresponding powers and duties, provide bidding requirements and procedures, provide parameters for requests for proposals, provide process for, provide severability of provisions, repealer, and provide an effective date. Is there a council member willing to introduce this ordinance?
So moved.
This ordinance was introduced by Councilman Kelly. And we have the next ordinance, which is for adoption, was introduced by Vice Mayor Butterbaugh. And it is an ordinance of the City of Altoona amending the code of the City of Altoona to amend Chapter 314 entitled Electricians, to amend the composition of the Electrical Examiners Board to establish an Electrical and Plumbing Examiners Board, amend the qualifications for Master Electrician and Journeyman certificates, amend the application for certificates, increase the amount of property damage and personal liability insurance, change the location for payment of certificates, reaffirm Chapter 314 as amended, provide severability and repeal provisions, and provide an effective date. Is there a motion for adoption?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
This ordinance was moved for adoption by Vice Mayor Butterbaugh and seconded by Councilman Carper, and I will call the roll for a vote. Vice Mayor Butterbaugh,
Yes.
Councilman Kushadi,
Yes.
Councilman Carper,
Yes.
Councilman Ickes,
Yes.
Councilwoman Jordan is absent, Councilman Kelly,
Yes.
and Mayor Pacifico.
Yes.
The vote passes 6-0. We have one more ordinance for adoption, which was introduced by Councilman Carper. It's an ordinance amending the code of the city of Altoona to amend Chapter 542 entitled Plumbers, to amend the composition of the plumbing board, to establish an electrical and plumbing examiners board, amend the qualifications for master plumber and journeyman certificates, reaffirm Chapter 542 as amended, provide severability and repeal provisions, and provide an effective date. Is there a motion for adoption?
So moved.
moved. Joe, second.
Second. This ordinance was moved for adoption by Councilman Carpenter and seconded by Vice Mayor Butterbaugh, and I will call the roll for a vote. Vice Mayor Butterbaugh,
Yes.
Councilman Kushadi,
Yes.
Councilman Carper,
Yes.
Councilman Ickes,
Yes.
Councilwoman Jordan is absent, Councilman Kelly,
Yes.
Mayor Pacifico,
Yes.
and the vote passes 6-0.
Okay, city manager updates.
With the budget presentation, I feel like I've already spoken way more than my normal limit, but I did want to mention one thing, that a member of one of our voluntary boards recently tested positive for COVID-19. And first and most importantly, I just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with the individual and the family for a quick and complete recovery. And I know at this point, everyone's suffering from a degree of COVID fatigue, but when you find out someone that you've been in the room with is tested positive, and we do have people that, you know, that serve completely on a volunteer basis, coming in, dedicating their time, energy, and talents. So, you know, I'll give you the reminder Tim, you know, always gives me, is the masking, social distancing, and frequent hand washing stuff, because it's here, and you know, it seems like it's been here forever, but again, yeah, just it bears repeating. But other than that, I'm content to yield the balance of my time to the distinguished gentleman at the dais.
Thank you, Ken. Mayor and council discussion items. Let's go that way. Councilman Ickes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Butterbaugh. Ken, have we had any further correspondence with Councilwoman Jordan's resignation?
No.
Okay, I just think it's a real disservice to the taxpayers of Altoona that we've had no correspondence or involvement through this tough budget process from Councilwoman Jordan.
When was the last time she participated in a meeting, even by phone?
Months.
Okay. And did she
Did you
she
say
check in
did-
with you, Ken?
Did you say
regarding
months, Linda?
Months.
Ken, did she check in with you regarding the budget and any kind of presentations?
No, she did not.
All right, so Councilwoman Jordan, if you're listening to this transmission of the council meeting, if you are going to resign, it would be nice if you would do that. You had indicated that that was your intention. And budget time is one of the more difficult things that we deal with as a city council. And it would be nice to have 7 people and their input on the process. So,
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, we get paid monthly to handle the city's decisions. Many of us operate at a deficit, probably with time and commitment that's involved in this. We're all duly elected by the citizens of Altoona, and I think it's time that we have 7 bodies that represent the city of Altoona.
Linda, is it possible to go back through the minutes and find out the last time that she attended?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. We started at Councilman Ickes, and who's next? Oh. I think I already said enough too, so thanks.
I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
I just have a few quick things. I want to thank you for your comments on the bids that were tabled tonight, and I share a lot of the concerns that you raised. As I understand it, there's not a policy currently on the books of the city discussing local contacts, but I'd certainly be amenable to that discussion at a future work session. I want to thank Ken and the leadership team for the work that you put into the budget to this point. We didn't make it easy by requesting that you hold the line, but I think it's very important to the citizens of the city that we do that in such a difficult year. So thanks again, and if you could extend thanks to everybody involved, that would be
I will.
great.
Thank you.
And then I just wanted to thank everybody involved with the ordinances that were adopted this evening. They represent a great deal of work from a bunch of different people. I mean, from council to the codes department and Rebecca, and the members of the boards, as well as members of the public who attended meetings and gave input on those. It was a great deal of work, and I appreciate everybody involved, and so thanks a lot.
Councilman Kashadi, do you have anything that you wanted to say?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to questions from the media. Bill?
Thank you. Can somebody tell me what the nature is of the 4 CDBG findings in the audit report?
There were 4 findings, only one, I believe, related to CDBG, but the city's audit, there was one involving our failure to sell some assets that we came into possession from inadvertently. I think that's something we're resolving this year. One was involving, the one that involved CDBG was failure to make entries in the general ledger in a timely fashion, which is a clear finding.
What are the other 2?
Segregation of duties,
Internal controls.
and no one on staff to produce the financial statements.
So Omar's drafted accounting policies and procedures, which should address the third finding, but it's always a struggle for a small operation to maintain appropriate internal controls. And I believe that with the recent hiring, we've resolved the final, because I believe we're going to have someone on staff who has the accounting expertise to do the end of year notes, which we have not had in the past.
Omar, did you say no one on staff to produce financial statements? Is that?
In accordance with the GASB standards, yes.
Next question, would any of the council members care to say anything more about the budget and particularly about the cutting of positions or the elimination of about a dozen positions when it all shakes out?
It's a fiscally responsible budget, and we really did give a tough task to Manager Ken and the staff, because we asked them to come up with a budget that would include 0 tax increases. We really feel strongly that increasing taxes would be the wrong thing to do, and so they had a tough job to do, and they did it.
This is also an attempt for the city to work to restructure for more operational efficiencies within departments and for the taxpayers of the city of Altoona.
And the reality is that Ken pointed it out early on in the discussion, is that we have an ever shrinking tax base. And, you know, we went through reassessment, and the value of assessed property in the city has started to decrease every year, which historically we've seen that and that was one of the problems before the county reassessed and the city had to go into Act 47, was that number was a slowly sinking ship. And since 2017, it's decreased, the value of assessed property has decreased 3%?
3%, yeah.
3% total. So that's shrunk. The city's population continues to decline. I think Ken in his notes said that in the last 10 years, we've had a decrease in population of 7%. So the number of people able to pay the earned income tax has declined. You know, so there's a shrinking tax base and fewer people to pay the bills. And that's just a harsh reality of it. And I think this council you know, especially when we, you know, looked at going into a pandemic, which we're still going through, the ramifications economically were still remain to be seen yet, that we felt that the thing we could not do, we didn't want to raise taxes going into a pandemic. And looking at that, and that we felt that would be counterproductive and be the wrong thing to do. So it's a tough budget. We gave the staff a pretty difficult charge, and they've stepped up to it. And the difficult decisions that have to be made, particularly when you look at a budget that is by and large almost exclusively devoted to the cost or devoted to personnel costs. So if you're going to maintain the budget, you have to reduce personnel costs. And that's what we're looking at now in this proposed budget. And that's never pleasant.
Yeah.
That's never pleasant. But you have to, like everybody else, we have to try to live within our means.
The easy thing would have been to kick the can down the road, but it wouldn't have been the right thing to do.
The long-term plan would be us developing a financial plan, which Ken is on the track of implementing, so that we can reduce our debt service and adequately fund our pension plans long-term.
Not to make a duplication of questions, but any comments in particular about the 4 police officers and the 2 firefighters whose positions are going to be eliminated or proposed to be eliminated by attrition sometime through next year?
So those are positions through attrition, I believe.
Yes.
I know that the day after my budget meeting with the city manager, I met with the police chief, and I asked questions as far as the handling of, if we felt, one, the department could handle those positions not being filled, and the answer was yes. And if the department, if the police chief felt that the positions, that the department was in a position to operate effectively with those positions not being filled immediately, and the answer was yes.
And not to intercede in the council, but I like I reflected to you earlier, but it hurts when you know how valuable these services are to a community, when you know how important the work that, not just police and fire, but public works, when you see how hard people are working on the streets every day, to know that you're going to ask fewer people do more. That's a hard thing, but it's no harder than the family that's taking a look at a reduced check and trying to make ends meet, or a business that has had to close for 3 months trying to figure out a way to meet payroll. It hurts for them too. So I think the principle is that we're all in this together. The city, its residents, its business community, we're going to find a way through it. But it's tough to face, particularly public safety professionals, and you know how valuable their contribution is, to ask the remaining people to do more.
Yeah, and the other thing we have to keep in balance, Bill, and historically, we have, the number of employees for the city has decreased dramatically, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's been through attrition. Where we haven't filled positions, and you know that from having covered the city of Altoona all these years. But we have to keep in check, who pays the bills, and the median household income for the city of Altoona is around $40,000.
Yeah.
And last numbers I saw, which it might have been 2019 figures, it's around $40,000. That's a median household income. Those are the people that pay the bills. So, and we're responsible to them.
And through the COVID-19 closures, we went from an unemployment rate nationwide of 3.5% to well over 10, deep into double digits in a week, and many of those have not recovered, particularly retail, restaurants, and other small businesses, including nonprofits and entertainment, that God only knows how long those effects are going to continue.
And sadly,
to
some of those
ripple
may
through.
never come back.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of small businesses, and I guess part of my other duties is part of the Pennsylvania 30-Day Fund. We've been able to raise money for some of these through a nonprofit for some of these businesses to give $3,000 forgivable loans. You call folks that are small business owners with under 30 employees, and they cry on the phone about how their small business has been devastated by Governor Wolf's lockdowns. It's absolutely unprecedented, and it's really a shame on a variety of levels what we're going through.
And a good portion of our citizens are retired on fixed incomes, and so asking them to pay more in taxes just is not a feasible ask.
The application for the grant, is that essentially the same as one that you've applied to DCED for?
This is the PennDOT version of that same grant.
Okay. And the other one you already applied for?
Yes.
correct? Okay. And then, I think I've asked this before, and I apologize, but the 457 plan, is that essentially the 401K for
Yes.
people who don't have a defined benefit
Yes.
pension?
Well, no, it's,
It's not 401K, it's not, they're apples and oranges, because with the forfeit, there's no match. 401K, there's usually an employer match. This is an optional plan that's available to city employees, it's voluntary participation.
It's a supplemental retirement plan. So
Yeah.
these folks are still covered. The non-uniform plan is a bargain defined benefit plan per Pennsylvania law. Fire and police are covered under a defined benefit plan. All 3 units are eligible to also participate under the deferred comp plan. There's no
All
match.
for union people?
Yeah.
there's no cost to the city on the 457 plan, which is a retirement savings
Oh,
plan. It's
okay.
it's the participants who bear the cost, which is, they pay a small percentage of the amount in the savings plan.
Yeah. And Ken, what's that number we're going through? We're going from what, 1.25% to
To 20,
0.25?
yeah, to 0.23.
0.23. That's excellent.
And then, why the ordinance, for the chapter, why the ordinance adding chapter 557, for purchase of real estate and supplies? What's that all about?
The charter requires us to have a purchasing ordinance. I mean, the charter, the home rule charter says the mayor and council shall adopt procedures for competitive bidding. This is just the chapter that fills in that blank that says this is how we buy things. And it's not just real estate, but it's goods, services, it's RFPs, it's competitive bidding. It's something almost every municipality routinely has as a purchasing ordinance.
So it's like a housekeeping thing?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Amanda, did you have questions, or did you want to ask them after the meeting?
I wanted to ask them after the meeting.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.